The world's most powerful central bankers are meeting at their annual gathering hall in Jackson Hole. Today, the Federal Reserve Chair spoke, and while she didn't talk about interest rates, she did have a warning for Washington and its push to roll back financial regulations. Steve Liesman has more.
Flanked by the president of the European Central Bank and the governor of the Bank of Japan, Janet Yellen took what might have been her final stroll as chair of the Federal Reserve in Jackson Hole on Friday. Her term is up in January, and while President Donald Trump has said she's under consideration for reappointment, her speech on financial regulatory reform here may not have helped her case. With a president who has said he wants to do a, quote, big number on the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act, Yellen cautioned against rolling back the essential reforms from the crisis. Yellen said they had made the financial system more stable and improved the banks and economic growth. She said it may be more difficult for some borrowers to obtain credit, but that overall lending was growing in line with the economy, contradicting a direct statement by the president about the need to reduce regulations. Yellen did concede that some rules could be reformed, for example, those about small and medium-sized banks. In a CNBC interview, Fed Governor Jay Powell disagreed there was a conflict now between the administration and the Fed.
We need to protect the important fundamental reforms, higher capital, higher liquidity, stress testing, resolution planning, that sort of thing. But at the same time, she said clearly that we're committed to reviewing the reforms to see whether they're effective and where there can be improvement. She said that several times in her speech, and that's exactly what we've been doing. We're looking at improvements, to lighten the regulatory burden for small banks, and I've got there are a long list of things that we're working for. These are common sense reforms to achieve effective regulation, but without unnecessary burden.
Yellen made no comment on monetary policy, but ECB President Mario Draghi did. He said that an easy monetary policy was still needed in Europe and that the European recovery was still in its early stages, that the ECB should be patient in reversing policy. Markets have been anticipating some announcement about the ECB easing off on the accelerator later this year. But Draghi chose not to make that news here in the Teton Mountains in Jackson Hole. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Steve Liesman in Jackson Hole, Wyoming.